So thank you so much, Una, for having me, for that great introduction, Vicky and Nancy as well. It's a pleasure. You know, I graduated from Acadia with a degree in psychology in 2007. And so this is a very proud moment for me to be able to come back and share some of the learnings I've had in my professional career. My topic is never waste a good crisis. And personally and professionally, it's a time of year, a time of economic cycle where it feels like there's a lot of crisis, a lot of political instability, environmental challenge. And so the lessons that I want to share today are applicable not just to your work world, your professional endeavors, but also to personal life. I know that there will be nuggets of truth we can all take to calm the waters. So as you heard from me, from Una about me, I have had a career that has bridged consulting and executive leadership. I'm also the mother of 3 young children. And I do feel like balancing work and life as well as leading in this corporate and consulting environment is a situation where nothing is ever smooth, nothing is ever easy. I'd actually like to start with a few corporate case studies that will share the philosophy that I have around crisis. Crisis is typically thought of as a bad thing, right? It's something that is stressful, terrible. When I announced the topic, I actually had some other members of the alumni group reach out to say, how are you going to spin this? Because I do crisis management and things are really not great in a crisis situation. But actually, when you look at the opportunity for an organization or an individual in an individual crisis situation, once that initial rush and pain are through, you have that opportunity to reflect and build in new skills and capabilities that can stick with you far longer than that crisis period. And that's where I say, never waste a good crisis because there's always the opportunity for growth. So let's start with Apple. Apple actually was quite close to bankruptcy. So we look at the late 90s, and now while Apple is pervasive, we have Apple Pay, we have a whole suite and portfolio of products and services. At one point, it was 3 months from shutting the doors. At that time, there was a lack of focus, and there was an issue with product market fit. The company, while close to shutting its doors, did a Hail Mary. They brought Steve Jobs back. And the focus that Steve had in this crisis situation was about focus and getting quality at the core of what was delivered. There was change to leadership, change to financial management, but most importantly, there was innovation. The iMac was introduced, iPod, and then later the iPhone. And Apple was able to turn things around so that within a year of Steve Jobs returning, they had $300 million of profit, when the previous year they were about to shut their doors. This is a turnaround situation, but where I say never waste a good crisis, it comes to the point that in Apple's DNA, they kept that focus of innovation, quality, and focus on the customer. In later years, they had iPhone, iTunes, Apple Pay, and a suite of other products and services that we're using so actively today. And I believe it was this crisis moment that changed their shift in focus and DNA to build in something far more sustainable. Another example, Amazon. In 2008, many retailers were shutting their doors. There was a crisis around affordability. As consumers tightened their spending, there was the opportunity to take this crisis and batten down the hatches. Amazon actually went in the opposite direction. They invested in innovation, but they also looked within house. So Amazon Web Services was a product, a service that was developed inside for employee use, cloud computing. This was monetized and brought out to the market and is now the single largest cloud computing software in the world. And this is where I say, again, Amazon was able to build and spin out multiple new business units, which took pressure off that core retail function. And it was a crisis situation when other retailers were shutting their doors or actually stepping back from that investment that Amazon built and lasted in a very different way. Another example, Tesla. Do you remember what was called by Elon Musk production hell? Production hell. This was when there were so many orders for Model 3s that the company could not actually deliver. There were massive backlogs, reputational risk. This was 2017-18 when there was a crisis around whether the company would actually be able to maintain its reputation and fill its ongoing obligations. The company had major shifts at this point. Rather than just focusing in on creating an innovative product and trying to embed innovation into every area of their manufacturing and production, through robotics, through automation, they actually went back to some manual production processes that allowed them to scale up and down with more efficiency. Elon Musk also moved into the factory and they set up another manufacturing line outside the facility that allowed them to scale up and down in a different way. The company has built far more understanding around ability to build manual processes and not rely specifically on automation and machine to be able to deliver for customers even now. Finally, Nike. So in the pandemic, retailers had the option to shutter their doors, step back from their retail service, or lean into other areas. Nike's digital adoption changed the way that the customers were able to purchase from the company with much more focus on direct to consumer. Other competitors were shutting their stores and not able to reopen even now, but Nike got first mover advantage with digital marketing, and as a result, they've grown by 10% a year over year since that point. What traits did these companies display in times of crisis? It's different for each organization, but I would suggest that they had some pieces in common. They had strong leadership, strong vision, and they were able to innovate and adapt to the situation as it faced, and not just innovate and adapt, which is easy to do for a moment, but they were able to adopt and sustain the change over a longer period. They had vision that was able to mobilize their workforce and mobilize their finances into specific areas, whether it was innovation, new product lines, or whether it was into efficiency and improving the supply chain. They focused on the customer. What would the customer need and how could they create fit? How could they focus on quality? And in the case of Nike, how did they use digital engagement, which was a new channel that they had invested in far less than they had in the traditional brick and mortar? Having come from the retail and consumer world, I can say it is a massive shift to go from brick and mortar to retail, or even harder to have an omni focus where you're tackling multiple channels at once. And so to do that in a crisis situation is certainly not easy or comfortable. And there's substantial resistance within that employee base to make a change, to change routines, to change their ways of thinking and working, and to change their jobs. But part of it comes into building flexibility into the DNA of the organization. And I'm going to focus here on not just how to deal with that crisis and to embed lasting change, but what the role is of change agents and change champions in any capacity, whether it's in your personal or professional life, in adopting those new ways. So let's make it personal for a moment. We've all experienced change. There's change in our ways of thinking and working in our professions. And so I'd actually like us to pause for a moment to reflect on changes, whether in our personal or professional life. And I actually will ask in the audience, once you've had a moment to reflect, if there's anyone who would like to share one of these changes.
I will.
Yes, please.
I just recently sold my home that I raised my sons in. And for me, this is a pivot. This is a change, and the landscape's going to look very different for the next little while.
That is a change. So if I may ask you, why did the change happen? You sold the home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was something that wasn't needed anymore.
Yes.
Right? They're doing their thing. They've moved on. And it was a house in Wolfville, which is worth a lot of money right now.
Yeah, so good on you. And then I would ask, what impacted your ability to adapt to the change? Because this is a hard personal change.
I don't know that I've adapted yet. That's why I'm sharing it with you now. A whole group of support right now, so yeah.
Perfect.
I'm still looking. I'm still trying to figure it out.
This is good. We can talk you through it. What challenges did you face when executing the change? What's on your mind now that makes it hard to adapt?
It's a heavy heart.
Yes.
A heavy heart saying goodbye to the home that I raised my children in. Yeah.
That's it. And then Did you end up better or worse, or too early to tell?
Please stand by.
Yeah. Well, Una, thank you so much for sharing. And this is where in our lives, we're constantly going through micro change to macro change. I have the same, with my kids. They seem like they just go to school one day and come home as a teenager. My eldest is 8, so he's not quite there, but he certainly acts like it. This is what I hear. And so as we're going through, we have to think about the level of change we're facing. Changes in the past used to be fairly clear. We would understand what the change was. We would be able to figure out how to adapt. It might be hard to adapt, but we could figure it out. And then we would respond to it in some way. Right way, wrong way, we would respond in some way. Over time, it became more complicated and chaotic to go through change. But right now, there's so many factors that are moving through us, and there are emotional factors, economic factors, political. Within our own organizations, there's so much change. I don't know many companies that didn't go through layoffs since end of pandemic. I know that there is a change for people in the workplace and the type of opportunity that they're working in today or looking for. More people going into gig economy. In Canada, 27% of our workforce is involved in gig economy today. That number is expected to double in the next 10 years. That's what the experts say. I think it'll double faster. And so when we're looking at change, we can't look in the vacuum of the one situation happening to us right now, because there's so many other factors affecting us, but then in the work context, also affecting our employees, our teams, our customers, our stakeholders. And it's with empathy and understanding that we can be most effective in creating change that is sustainable and that will create the impact we actually want, whether in our personal or professional lives. There are many frameworks we can use, but let me start us off with something very simple. Thinking about the context of that change is where I'm going with this. How can we understand the change not in the vacuum, but within the entire realm of moving parts in our world? It's also about leadership. In each of those corporate examples that I shared, leadership was the key to getting out of that crisis in a sustained positive way. But even in those cases, it wasn't easy. I say Steve Jobs, he executed massive layoffs in Apple's turnaround. The leadership team before that point overhired. There are leader implications in every part of causing or responding or solving different areas of crisis. And then finally, how do you bridge the gaps and keep them closed? Because in an organization, in a time of change, you need to be able to continue moving and delivering business as usual while responding to this change in crisis. Those two sides are going to look different depending on that situation. But a business can't stop and shut down and say, okay, sorry, I have to deal with the crisis right now. Customers, you're not getting your cars. You're not getting your shoes. We'll get back to you in 6 months when we've solved our crisis. We can't do that. We have to maintain. And this is the same in our personal lives as well. We might be going through a situation that's affecting us emotionally. It's very difficult for us to stay home, shut out the world, and say, I'll get back to you, world, when my personal crisis is over. So let's go through and talk about the challenges of strategy execution, but also how we can tangibly create change. And looking at context, I go back to a very simple model, SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Looking inside and outside your organization at those moving parts to realize not just what is affecting your change, but again, remember, never waste a good crisis. Where do we have gaps and opportunities that we can solve while in a bigger crisis situation? This model and being really thoughtful, not just before a crisis, which would be great, but even in a crisis situation is helpful. So you're not wasting that opportunity for transformation. And let's go through. I've talked a lot about context and change. I've given you the big pictures on what some of this looks like, but let's be very specific. For any individual operating in the world today, any of our employees, our colleagues, our spouses, our family members, this is one day of news. I actually pulled this fresh yesterday so we could see the headlines. this is what we are dealing with and what is taking our mental capacity today. And this is one slide. This is certainly not all the news, all the papers. It's just a snapshot. So when we're going through our own business as usual, or we're going through a crisis situation on top of that, we're also dealing with massive local, country level, and international change. And we have to consider that when we're looking for opportunities to make the best of the situation, as well as risks around burning out our people. There are questions we can use to understand our context, aside from reading the newspaper and talking to those connections. So what are the issues and trends shaping your context, personally or professionally? Who are your stakeholders and what do they expect? Even better, if you actually engage with your stakeholders on an ongoing basis before you hit a crisis, but certainly in those moments of crisis, how can you speak with others to make sure that they're aware of what you are doing to create value, to end the crisis, to end up better and stronger, to open up, to say, what we had before was good, what we will have in the future is better, and I want to bring you along on this journey, and maybe even to say, here's what I need from you. And to ask, what do you need from me in this period? What do you need to stay ahead of them? This is also thinking about what your plan is going to be. It's not possible to create a prescriptive roadmap when dealing with a crisis situation because there's so many unknowns. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in a crisis. You would have just said, I opt out of this. So what can you do even in those situations to continue thinking long term? Something that companies often do is they say, we have a crisis right now. We're going to focus on value in this quarter. What can we deliver that will affect our bottom line right now? They pass off on the opportunities for transformation or disruptive innovation. And as a result, when they get through the crisis, sometimes they're behind their competitors and they just can't catch up. I go back to the examples that I shared with you of Amazon in 2008, continuing to invest in innovation when their competitors were pulling back. They were able to actually leapfrog. And you look right now at the retail landscape, having just come from the retail landscape, I say, I don't know how the big companies are going to catch up. Then, do you have the right structures in place to deliver on commitments? This is both during the crisis, pre-crisis, if you can plan for this, and then afterwards, what is going to need to change to sustain what you would like this transformation to hold for you? Specifically, this could be the design of your organization, where boxes move, roles and responsibilities within the team. Pretend that you're moving to create a new business unit like Amazon Web Services. Maybe you actually want to invest more people in that space to sustain it so it's not a side of desk project. If you believe strongly in it, put your money where your mouth is, put your headcount where it needs to be. It can also be about technology, infrastructure, data privacy and security. What can you do both to anticipate where your issues might fall and prevent them, as well as afterwards being able to adapt so that these issues don't happen again as much as you can within your control. And then to think through the challenges you will need to overcome in the short term, medium, and long term. After the crisis, what is going to continue to happen? What will those ripple effects be? The tsunami only happens after the earthquake. So don't think that just because you're past solving for your immediate moment in the crisis, that you will have smooth waters. They can continue. So what do you need to make sure that you continue on a positive trajectory, even if those challenges come? Now we go back to leadership. Leaders are often the first barrier to change. I've led changes around the world with clients in 12 countries. And for me, the major success factor in an initiative was having a strong, passionate, supportive leadership team that was going to make it happen, that was going to make it successful. 100% of the projects that I was involved with, without those strong leaders, failed. 100%. I can't think of a single project that actually achieved the value for the business that was anticipated if the leaders were not on board. And this can be difficult because sometimes a change affects those leaders. And sometimes they're thinking about what it means for them, for their hierarchy, for their level of power. When you're looking at, let's say, something like an organization design, It can be thought that there are winners and losers. Somebody's going to get the bigger team. Somebody's going to get the better scope. So it's very hard to get every member of that table equally aligned. I'd suggest it's phenomenal to have leadership alignment, but you just need a tiebreaker. And in those projects that I've delivered where we had a strong executive sponsor, the projects were far more likely to work. But you also have to look, when you're considering change failure, at what you're putting in to make this change successful and why it's such a problem if the change fails. When you are trying to mobilize people around something different, you're building a sense of urgency. That sense of urgency is what gets people on board to try something new, to try it out, and to suspend their disbelief because change is so hard, so that they'll actually try to follow through and make it successful. When you mobilize people toward a change and you're not serious about that change, you lose trust. And the next time you have a change, let's say it's a crisis where you don't have the option to opt out, people are much less likely to get on board and support that success because they say, if I wait it out, it's going to go away because that's what happened last time. And this is where leaders need to actually lean in to that change, lean into the crisis situation and make decisions. Oftentimes when there's instability, where you have business as usual, you have crisis, and maybe you have opportunity for change at the end, leaders will be overwhelmed because of everything that they're navigating. One point is leaders need support, coaching, and they need education on how to lead through crisis, just like everyone else. People, just through the nature of leadership or as title, does not mean that they will be comfortable or confident navigating change. Maybe they're very comfortable navigating as a leader in those times of calm. So organizations need to invest in creating that strong, resilient leadership team and creating structures where decisions can be made quickly and easily. These can be about governance forums. It could even be about psychological safety in the language that's used. Others can act in ways that impede the change. We'll talk about that soon, but there's constructive and destructive resistance, and both of them play a role in making the change more or less successful. And finally, for leaders, changing their organization may mean changing themselves, the way they think, the way they work, the way they lead. For organizations that are leaning into innovation, transformation, they need to build new skill sets and a different way of thinking where immediate profitability is important. It's not everything. Investors used to say about Amazon, are they ever going to make a profit? Because the company was so focused on growth. They were so leveraged so that they could build faster and better than other companies. It's a different way of thinking when you need to move to actual profitability, and the same goes the other way. So what is the role of leaders through change? Change is difficult. Change involves emotion. You can think of any change in your personal or professional life, and we're not robots. We're going through it as real humans at the time that the organization or the world around us is changing. I'll give a little example. I was doing a tech adoption project for a large transit agency, and in this organization, there was a ton of resistance, and it didn't feel like this change was so big until we actually spoke with the stakeholders, the people who were being affected, to say, why is this change so hard to overcome? And what the people said is, I was always really good at my job. I take pride in being an excellent delivery leader in my scope. And now there's a new technology that I'm not quite sure how to use, and I'm worried I'm not going to be good at my job anymore. So something that can feel like a small change we're imposing changes people's routines, their confidence, their sense of self. And when you go to bigger changes, people are worried about that at a bigger state. You think about layoffs. Organizations are going through massive change because they have to. At the same time, you're losing knowledge, you're losing thought leadership, camaraderie in the workplace. The people who are left are surviving, but they're working in a very different way, even if their specific role hasn't changed. And that's where leaders need to come in with empathy to validate how people are feeling. They need to be informed so that they can communicate. They need to have that script of what to say when there are no words, when it can be really difficult to come up with them, and when you need alignment across the team. The last thing you want is to speak with one leader, hear something, speak with another one, hear something very different, because that can hurt trust and confidence in the change. You need to build structure and to have everyone come together to an ultimate place of alignment. And that's where you can actually get out of the productivity dip that happens with change and get into sustainment. And that's where leaders at some point need to make a choice. Are they in or are they out? Are they going to buy in and make this thing successful? And how are they going to move forward as one to create this change? It comes back to willingness and ability. So willing, do you want this change? Do you want it to work? What are the reasons? And can you see that vision in your mind? And does your heart believe this change needs to happen? This can be personal or professional. Able, it's much more tangible. Do you have the right resources? Do you have enough people to make this change happen? Do you have the right tools and systems? People can really want something to work, but if this is under-resourced and they're working on it off the side of their desk, it's not going to be successful because they have willingness and not ability. And it's up to those leading a change or sponsoring a change to ensure that both sides are balanced. And now we have resistance, because resistance to a change is going to happen. It always happens. It happens in different degrees and in different types. You can have constructive resistance where people want the change to be successful, but they're sharing with you why they think there may be risks or issues, where they think maybe you haven't thought of something or you haven't thought about it in the right way. Then there's destructive. Destructive is where they honestly just don't want the change to work. And that can come out either as the loud, belligerent person in the room, storming out, expressing all the reasons in the space why this is not going to work. You could also have it be much quieter. It could be covert. It could be at the water cooler, people talking, whispering about why this isn't going to work. Even if in the room, they were sitting there and nodding. That's really dangerous. So for all of us, as we're going through personal or professional change, we need to think, are we hearing resistance? If not, maybe we need to ask the questions, make sure we're getting all those perspectives out. If we are hearing the resistance, where is it coming from? Is this about willingness, ability, or something personal, something emotional? And how can we support those individuals in sustaining that change and getting them to the point that they can get on board and help us build, grow, and create something that will be of lasting benefit in the organization? What leadership traits do you need and do you have to create this meaningful change? There are many, but a couple that I'll lean in on. Horizontal scanning. This is about understanding the context, understanding the stakeholders, and not doing it just once, but continuing to understand the environment around us, because change continues to change. So we need to make sure that we have the latest information and are making the best decisions based not just on what's happening today, but what we anticipate to be those future trends. Rapid prototyping. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Don't go all in until you have a sense that this is the right path. While I do deeply believe in transformation and disruptive innovation and will always support those initiatives at some point, I still believe you need to start small and learn fast. Be ready to fail, because what you don't want to do is go into a transformation or disruptive innovation that is going to compromise your core business until you know that this is the right bet to make. Finally, rebel rousing. This goes back to resistance. You want people who question the status quo. If you have a whole team of people like you who think the way you do, you're going to miss things. So find people who can create that balance of perspectives, input, insight, and not be worried or nervous to share, and create the environment, even in your own household, where people feel open to talk about what's working and what's not, and what could be next. So how do you bridge the gaps and keep them closed? This goes into learning. There are different ways to build. I will focus on one in particular, linking with personal motivation. This is a very powerful tactic. Figure out what people care about in a crisis situation, in a change, even business as usual, and align your tactics with what they personally care about, what will help them benefit. When I was leading agile transformation in my past with a large retailer, I actually, even though I didn't fully believe in the value of a certification, I thought maybe it's 60 to 70% useful. But this was a way that I could get change champions on because they could get a certificate that they can then put on their resume and use as a point of pride with their professional network, friends, and family. It certainly didn't hurt, but was it the best thing? No, we probably could have had an in-house training that might have taught them a little bit more. But I wouldn't have gotten the same attendance, the same excitement to get on board with this agile transformation if people weren't personally getting something to put on their resume. And that was enough to get to mobilize a group of people and gain that momentum that helped us transform. Another, integrated delivery methods. People learn differently, and it's not about teaching once, it's about providing the resources that they will be able to use ongoing, and to make it real with problem-based learning. It should not be theoretic, academic. It needs to be about what they'll actually use, especially in a crisis situation, because people's cups are already full. They're already dealing with so much. Their batteries are empty, right? It feels like a lot to add even another little drop of water when they're so close to overflowing. And then provide constructive challenge. Constructive challenge could be something that's aligned with your long-term goals, or it could be something in that in-quarter value. But figure out for those individuals what is going to get them excited, sustain them through periods of change, and do that. Now, I leave you with this idea. Focusing exclusively on leadership or leadership development is like changing the water the goldfish swims in, but forgetting to clean the bowl. And this is where we go back to all of those other elements that we talked about in terms of being able to lead and create change through a crisis. Innovation and adaptability. This is about being able to ebb and flow and think about art of the possible, not just what you're feeling now. Leadership and vision. Have that strong sponsor network, people who can guide even when it's hard, make decisions even when it's not obvious or clear what you're trying to decide on. You need to have things move forward. Otherwise, you can get stuck at the bottom of that productivity curve. Always keep your customers and stakeholders at your heart. They're the ones who are going to sustain you through the change, to stick with you or not, so you cannot forget about them. Digital and engagement. I would say this is actually about using the channels available to you, thinking omni, thinking big picture. How can you reach your customers, your employees, your stakeholders? Don't do one thing just because it's the way you've always done. And then finally, always be flexible, diversify, build a portfolio of your career. Treat yourself and the change that you're going through as not one thing, but multiple moving parts. And overall, even though one part might not be going as well, make sure your portfolio is net positive. And create that willingness and ability with your leaders and your teams to guide that transformation. So thank you for starting your day with me, starting your breakfast with me. It was a pleasure.